Your insolence knows no bounds. I will not tolerate such disrespect.
You already know something is wrong. Not with your circumstances, with you. In the quiet moments, when there is no audience, no performance required, no one watching, you feel the gap between the man you say you are and the man who actually showed up today. You reacted when you should have been unmoved. You negotiated with yourself when the answer was already obvious. You gave someone who hadn't earned it a reaction that cost you an hour of peace. You reached for the comfortable option and built a story around why that was acceptable. And then you came here, consumed, more content about strength, as if understanding it one more time is going to produce what actually living it has not. The Stoics had a word for the man who keeps acquiring philosophy without letting it change his behavior. They called him asleep, not weak, not broken, asleep. And that distinction matters. Because the asleep man is not lacking the potential. He is lacking the specific laws that convert knowing into being. 8 of them, right now. No inspiration, just the precise rewire. Think like an emperor, move like a shadow. 8 brutal Stoic laws that'll rewire your mind from the ground up. This is how to become mentally unbreakable. Law 1. Discomfort is not your enemy. Comfort is. Here is the mechanism most men never confront directly. Every time you choose the comfortable option, the easier conversation, the shorter session, the path of least resistance, your brain registers the choice. Not loudly, quietly. It files it as evidence of who you are. And over time, the accumulated evidence becomes the default. The man who consistently chooses comfort becomes a man who requires comfort to function. And a man who requires comfort to function is completely owned by his circumstances. The Stoics understood this with surgical precision. Seneca deliberately slept on a hard floor, ate the cheapest available food, wore rough clothing, not because he could not afford otherwise. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, because he refused to let comfort become a requirement. He wrote, "Set aside days during which you shall be content with the scantiest fare, saying to yourself, 'Is this the condition I feared?' That question is the practice. When you deliberately introduce discomfort and discover that you survive it, that discovery removes the fear. And fear of discomfort is the mechanism through which comfortable people control you. Remove the fear and you remove the lever. The immediate application is not complicated. Choose one discomfort today that your mind is currently negotiating with. The cold shower, the conversation you have been avoiding, the session your body is making excuses to skip. Choose it. Do not debate it. Do not wait for motivation. The choice is the training. The execution is the proof. And proof, accumulated over days, becomes a man who does not need to be comfortable to perform. Law 2. The man who can be provoked can be controlled. Epictetus said this with a precision that should land like a diagnosis. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master. Read that again. Master, not irritant, not inconvenience, master. The person who sent the message that ruined your morning now has authority over you that your closest advisors do not. You handed it to them, not dramatically, with a single unguarded reaction. Here is what emotional reactivity actually communicates in every room where it occurs. It communicates that your internal state is governed from the outside, that whoever designs the right stimulus can determine your response, that you are, in the precise Stoic sense, not free. And every person in the room, consciously or not, receives that information and files it. The man who does not react does not do so because he feels nothing. He does so because he has built the gap, the space between the stimulus and the response. That gap is where sovereignty lives, and it is built through one practice, applied consistently. When you feel the reactive impulse arriving, the flush of anger, the urge to respond immediately, the pull toward proving yourself, you pause. You breathe once, slowly. You ask one question: what does my character require here? Not what does this feeling want? Then you act from the answer to that question, not from the feeling. Over time, the gap widens. The reactive impulse arrives later, then quieter. Then you stop recognizing it as an impulse and start experiencing it as information. Data about the situation that you process, rather than emotions that process you. That is emotional sovereignty. It is rare, it is magnetic, and it begins with the next moment you choose not to react. Law 3. Expecting fairness is the most expensive belief you carry. This law is the one that separates men who grow from men who stagnate while convinced they are victims of circumstance. The expectation of fairness is not just naive, it is strategically destructive. Because the moment you frame your situation as unfair, you have placed the cause of your condition outside yourself. And once the cause is outside, so is the solution. You are now waiting for external correction rather than internal response. That wait will continue indefinitely. The universe does not have a fairness department. Marcus Aurelius, governing an empire that threw betrayal, plague, war, and personal loss at him simultaneously, wrote, "Life is not a fair arrangement. Life is a neutral force. What you bring to it determines what you receive from it." He did not write this from a palace of ease. He wrote it on campaign, in a military tent, managing catastrophe. His position was that the question, "Why is this happening to me?" is always less useful than the question, "What is my next move?" Not because the injustice is acceptable, because the energy spent arguing with the injustice is energy stolen from the response. Here is the practical reframe. Every time you feel that this is not fair thought arriving, replace it with one question. What would a man who accepts full responsibility for his next action do here? Not full responsibility for what caused the situation. Full responsibility for the response. That shift, from external attribution to internal agency, is the entire difference between a man who grows through adversity and a man who is defined by it. Law 4. What you cannot control is not your business. Stop paying rent on it. The Stoics divided the entire world into two categories. What is up to you? Your judgment, your effort, your response, your character. What is not up to you? Everything else. Other people's opinions, outcomes, markets, other people's decisions, the weather, health, reputation. And they were ruthless about where attention belonged. Any attention given to the second category is attention stolen from the first. And the first category is the only place your power actually lives. Most men operate backwards. They spend 90% of their mental energy on the second category. Other people's perceptions, uncontrollable outcomes, situations they cannot change. And give whatever is left to the only place where genuine influence is possible. Here is what this costs you concretely. The energy you spend on outcomes you cannot control is not neutral. It produces anxiety, rumination, and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from working hard at something that has no lever. And it leaves you depleted for the decisions and actions that actually move your life. The practice is a filter. Every time you feel your attention being pulled towards something, a concern, an anxiety, a frustration, run it through one question: is this within my control? If yes, act immediately and completely. If no, release it with the same deliberateness you would use to set down a weight you have been carrying for no reason. This filter, applied consistently, does something that feels almost like a superpower. It concentrates all of your available energy on the only things that actually respond to your effort. And a man whose energy is completely concentrated is genuinely formidable in a way that scattered men never are. Law 5. Voluntary hardship is not punishment. It is calibration. The Stoics did not practice voluntary hardship because they believed suffering was virtuous. They practiced it because they understood a specific psychological mechanism. The man who has chosen discomfort before it arrives is never shocked by it. And a man who cannot be shocked by difficulty cannot be broken by it. Seneca wrote, "Is this the condition I feared?" After sleeping on a rough mat and eating plain food. That question is the entire point of the practice. Because the answer is almost always, no, this is survivable. I can function in this. And once you know you can function in reduced circumstances lose the power to determine your performance. In the modern context, this is specific. The man who never skips a meal will be destabilized by hunger. The man who practices going without, deliberately, regularly, discovers that hunger is uncomfortable but not debilitating. The man who never tolerates cold will be reduced by discomfort. The man who has practiced cold has already run the threat assessment and returned the verdict. Survivable. Choose one voluntary hardship this week, not for the aesthetic of discipline, for the specific psychological calibration it produces. Fast for a day. Sleep less than you want to. Remove a comfort you have been treating as a requirement. Do it with the deliberate intention of discovering whether you can function without it. You will discover that you can. And that discovery is one of the most psychologically liberating experiences available to a man. Law 6. Detach from the outcome. Attach to the standard. Here is one of the most counterintuitive and most powerful Stoic laws for the man who wants to actually perform at the highest level. When you are attached to the outcome, when your sense of worth rises and falls with the result, you introduce a fragility into your performance that undermines it. You become tense, desperate, approval-seeking in the micro-decisions of execution. And that desperation, imperceptible to the conscious mind, is completely perceptible to the people observing and interacting with you. Marcus Aurelius operated with what the Stoics called the reserve clause, full effort with full detachment from result. His philosophy was, bring everything to the work, hold nothing back in the execution, and simultaneously require nothing from the outcome. The result is not yours to determine. The effort is. The practical application is a mental shift before you begin any important action. Instead of thinking, I need this to work out, think, I am going to execute this at the highest standard I am capable of. The result will be what it is. Then perform from that place. What this produces is counterintuitive. Detachment from outcome does not reduce your motivation. It removes the anxiety that was constricting your performance. The man who needs the outcome to validate him is playing not to lose. The man who has released the outcome is playing to execute. Those two men are not operating at the same level, in any field, in any context. The second man consistently outperforms the first because he has removed the most consistent performance killer available, the fear of failing. Law 7. The man who does not think about death thinks about nothing important. This is the Stoic teaching that modern culture has worked hardest to make you forget. And forgetting it is costing you everything. Memento mori, remember you will die. Not as a morbid observation, as the sharpest clarifier available to a human mind. Because the man who genuinely holds his mortality in front of him makes entirely different decisions than the man who operates as if time is inexhaustible. Marcus Aurelius wrote it as a daily instruction to himself. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think, not someday, right now. And the decisions you make from that awareness are different. The conversation you have been meaning to have for 3 years happens today. The work you have been waiting to begin starts this week. The unnecessary conflict you have been sustaining because your ego needed to be right, you release it because the math of a finite life does not support paying the price of prolonged ego battles. This is not pessimism. This is the specific quality of urgency that separates the man who lives deliberately from the man who drifts. Drifting is only possible when you believe time is unlimited. The man who knows it does not drift, he moves. With intention, with precision, with the particular seriousness that belongs to a person who understands that this day will not be repeated. One practice. Each evening before you sleep, ask, did I live today as if it mattered? Not as if I was performing. As if it genuinely, irreversibly mattered. Answer honestly, then decide what tomorrow demands. Law 8. Build your identity around virtue. Everything else is rented. Here is the distinction that separates the psychologically sovereign man from every other kind. The man who builds his identity around outcomes, his income, his status, his reputation, other people's assessment of him, has built on sand. Every fluctuation in those external variables is a fluctuation in his sense of self. A bad quarter destabilizes him. A social slight wounds him. A failure publicly observed becomes a threat to his fundamental identity. He is not strong. He is contingent. His stability is entirely dependent on circumstances cooperating. The man who builds his identity around virtue, the quality of his decisions, the consistency between his stated values and his actual behavior, The standard he maintains, regardless of who is watching, has built on stone. Nothing external can take this from him because it is not located outside him. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one, not. Appear to be one, not. Be recognized as one. Be one. In the private moments, in the decisions no one will see. In the way you treat people who can do nothing for you, and people who can take everything from you." The practical application is one question applied daily. If everything external were stripped from my life, the money, the reputation, the recognition, would what remains be worth respecting? The man who can answer yes to that question is not touched by the loss of any of those things. And the man who cannot answer yes has identified precisely where his work needs to go. Build the inner thing first. The external things are outcomes. Character is the cause, and causes precede effects, always in every domain without exception. In conclusion, discomfort is calibration. Choose it before it chooses you. Reactivity is surrender. Build the gap between stimulus and response. Fairness is a myth that keeps men passive. Replace it with radical responsibility. Your power lives only in what you control. Stop paying rent on everything else. Voluntary hardship removes the fear of hardship. Practice it deliberately. Detach from outcome, attach to standard, the paradox that produces peak performance. Mortality is not morbid. It is the sharpest available clarifier of how to spend your time. Identity built on virtue cannot be taken. Identity built on outcomes is rented. These 8 laws are not abstract. They are the operating architecture of men who have been built by something more demanding than comfort, more rigorous than motivation, and more permanent than approval. They were written in tents and prison cells and imperial courts by men who had no margin for philosophical performance. The laws worked because reality tested them daily and they held. Now reality is testing you, daily, in smaller ways but with the same fundamental question underneath each test. Are you actually the person you believe yourself to be when things are easy? Build the answer into your behavior, starting with the next decision. Not eventually now. Think like an emperor, move like a shadow. Which of these 8 laws name the exact gap in your life right now? Not the most impressive sounding one, the one that you already knew before you heard it here. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one.